our effort to defeat a pandemic, to save lives, and to help each other make it to a better day. But yesterday, we were jolted from that common cause by the senseless violence and tragedy in Nova Scotia. A gunman claimed the lives of at least 18 people. Among them, a woman in uniform, whose job it is to protect lives even if it endangers her own, Constable Heidi Stevenson of the RCMP. Constable Stevenson died protecting others. She was answering the call of duty, something she had done every day when she went to work for 23 years. This happened in small towns. Portapique, Truro, Milford, and Enfield are places where people have deep roots, places where people know their neighbors and look out for one another. There, everyone knows a Mountie because they're everything from police officers to social workers to teen counselors. Now these communities are in mourning, and Canada is in mourning with them. To the grandparent who lost a child, to the children who lost a parent, to the neighbor who lost a friend, we are so sorry for your loss. Such a tragedy should have never occurred. Violence of any kind has no place in Canada. We stand with you and we grieve with you, and you can count on our government's full support during this incredibly painful time.
Yesterday, at least 18 people lost their lives after a shootout in Nova Scotia, plunging families and their loved ones in mourning. Some lost children, some lost a parent, some lost a friend. Our thoughts and the thoughts of all Canadians are with you. Such a tragedy should never have occurred. There is no place for violence in our country. We share in your mourning, and we stand with you and mourn with you as you go through these very painful times.
I wish a full and speedy recovery to all those injured, including another RCMP officer. Canada is a vast and sweeping country filled with long stretches of lonely roads, with unwavering courage and compassion. Our Royal Canadian Mounted Police patrol these roads to keep us safe, as they have for over 100 years. I know that from coast to coast to coast, the women and men who wear the red serge in service to Canada are grieving deeply the loss of one of their own and one of our best. This tragedy is a painful reminder of the risks all of our first responders take to keep us safe, of the sacrifices they make every single day to protect our communities. Paramedics, doctors, nurses, firefighters, and police officers, they're always here for us. They've been stepping up through the pandemic, and yesterday in Nova Scotia, they showed that bravery. I want to take a moment to thank them all for their professionalism and their courage. Many of you are already working overtime because of this pandemic. Our communities need you now more than ever, and I know that can weigh on you at times. These are exceptional circumstances, yet you did what you always do. You ran towards danger. Without pause, without hesitation, you put your life on the line. On behalf of all Canadians, thank you for your service.
I'd just like to take a moment to thank all our first responders for their courage and their professionalism. You are already working very hard because of the pandemic, More than ever, we need you. And sometimes that must seem to be a very heavy responsibility and burden on your shoulders. Despite these exceptional circumstances, you have done what you're used to doing. You did not hesitate to risk your own lives to save others. On behalf of all Canadians, thank you for everything you're doing.
This day is made all the more difficult because of the precious lives lost and the senseless act of one person. Just how could this happen? We may never know why. But we do know this. No one man's action can build a wall between us and a better day, no matter how evil, how thoughtless, or how destructive. Canadians are kind and generous. We are there for each other and we look out for one another. As families grieve the loss of a loved one, all Canadians are standing with them. The pandemic will prevent us from mourning together in person, but a vigil will be held virtually to celebrate the lives of the victims at 7 p.m. on Friday through the Facebook group Colchester Supporting Our Community. As we learn more about what happened yesterday, it's important that we come together to support communities. In the hours since the tragedy, I've spoken with Premier McNeil, RCMP Commissioner Lucky, Minister Blair, and many Nova Scotians, including our Nova Scotia caucus. We will continue to work together to see this through. I know that people have a lot of questions. This is an ongoing investigation, but I can assure you that the RCMP and local authorities will keep you updated. I want to ask the media to avoid mentioning the name and showing the picture of the person involved. Do not give him the gift of infamy. Let us instead focus all our intention and attention on the lives we lost and the families and friends who grieve.
While the pandemic will prevent us from gathering and mourning together, a virtual vigil will be held on Friday at 7 p.m. through the Facebook group Colchester Supporting Our Community. It will be an opportunity for us to celebrate the life of these victims and to be there for their family and their loved ones. I hope that many of you will join with us on this occasion. As we seek to understand what happened yesterday, we must be there for each other. Since this tragedy, I have had discussions with Premier McNeil, the RCMP Commissioner Brenda Lucky, the Minister of Public Safety Bill Blair, and our Nova Scotia caucus, among other people. We will continue to work together on this issue. I know that people have questions. The investigation is still underway, but I can assure you that the RCMP and local authorities will make you aware of the latest developments. I am also asking the media not to use the name or photos of the person behind these terrible actions. Let's not give him this gift. Let's focus instead on the victims and their loved ones.
By addressing all the kids in Nova Scotia and right across the country. I know the world can seem like a mean and ugly place right now, but there's a whole lot of good in the world too. You'll see it in your neighbors and in Canadians in the days and weeks and months ahead. This is a difficult time, and it can be a scary time too. But we're here for you, and we're going to get through this together. I promise.
Merci. On va commencer la conférence de presse avec le téléphone aujourd'hui. Modérateur, c'est à vous.
Thank you. Merci. First question, Laura Osmond, the Canadian Press. Line open.
Mr. Prime Minister, I wanted to ask you, Conservative leader Andrew Scheer today accused you of being inflexible in your negotiations about the number of in-person sittings in Parliament. I was wondering if there's any room for a compromise, 2 sittings per week, for example, given that moving forward may be preferable to no deal at all.
Look, I don't want to get into arguments with anyone today. We are working together amongst all parties to try and figure out a way to both protect and uphold our democracy, to ensure that there is proper accountability, while at the same time doing that responsibly. And I am hopeful that we're going to be able to come to an appropriate arrangement.
Follow-up question.
I was wondering if we could have an accounting of all of the ways that the opposition has been kept informed of the ongoing crisis and the government's actions outside of the House to date.
As I said, we have been engaged with all parties over the course of this pandemic. There have been many good ideas brought forward by business leaders, by community groups, by individual Canadians, but also by MPs from all parties who've heard from citizens in their communities what's needed to be done to help. This has been an unprecedented effort across government to try and make sure that we are giving Canadians the help they need to get through this difficult time, and we will continue to do that.
Merci. Prochaine question. Opérateur.
Thank you. Merci. Next question, Kate Bolingaro, Bloomberg, line open.
Hello, Mr. Prime Minister. I have a question for you regarding navigating Canada through this crisis. Obviously, you're leading this G7 country through this pandemic, and you've also been personally impacted by this. So I'm wondering, how would you say that this pandemic has impacted your governing style as a leader and your perception of your role as our Prime Minister?
I think one of the things that we've seen right across the country is how Canadians have pulled together through this difficult time, and that's something that we've always done. We make sure we're there for each other when we encounter difficulties, and right across the country, whether it's premiers, whether it's municipal leaders, whether it's community groups or individual Canadians, we've seen Canadians step up for each other. And the privilege of being able to serve Canadians through this difficult time is really quite something when you see just how Canadians are resolute in their desire to support each other through this. Obviously, the capacity to work across all orders of government, work together as a country, is what is keeping us on a good path through this. There are too many tragedies to name going on as people lose loved ones right across the country. But at the same time, we know that what we are doing is helping prevent further tragedies, and we're going to continue to do that.
On a follow-up, Kate.
And how would you describe your strategy? What has it been in terms of inside the PMO office to getting us through these tough times? And how would you assess your own performance on that?
Our focus every step of the way has been listening to the best advice of experts and scientists on what we need to do to keep Canadians safe in this, and to ensure that everything we're doing is giving Canadians the comfort and confidence that we're all in this together and that we are going to be there for each other. I think that has been key to making sure that people are able to self-isolate, are able to take the difficult measures necessary to get us through this pandemic, is to know that as a country, as systems, as governments, we're there for each other, and making sure that Canadians feel that support and know that we're going to get through this together has been key in making us able to get through this together.
Merci. Opérateur, prochaine question.
Thank you. Merci. Prochaine question, Marie Vastel, Le Devoir. À vous.
Good morning, Mr. Trudeau. I understand that you don't really want to talk about Parliament at this time, but I pretty much have to discuss this with you in spite of that. And I'd like to have you comment on your impression of what citizens are thinking, looking at what's happening in Ottawa now. People are at home and have been there for more than a month now. And we are seeing what's happening with this pandemic. And now Parliament is resuming in person because a number of political parties can't agree. What do you think citizens are thinking to themselves in seeing this today? Well, I think citizens understand that it is important, not because of the crisis or in spite of the crisis, but because of the crisis, that we continue to defend our institutions and sit as a parliament, but at the same time to find a way to do that responsibly. I think it's important to continue to have questions and to talk about the measures that will help Canadians, and we are proposing various ways of working together responsibly and constructively. Most of the parties agree, and I know that there will be further discussions today to try and figure out what the process should be and how we can defend our democratic principles and institutions, but responsibly. Follow up? There are some parties, well, one party, the Bloc Québécois, which is accusing the Conservatives of holding Parliament hostage. And I'd like to have you comment on that characterization of the current situation. And I'd also like to hear you comment on the idea of a compromise, in the sense that there is one party demanding 3 in-person sittings per week. You don't agree, and if that you don't agree, there will be 5. That would seem to be worse, based on your current perspective, where you're saying now there should be almost none. Do you not think it would be better to negotiate and try to agree on 3 sittings rather than being stuck with 5? I do not want to get involved in any partisan bickering today. I don't think that's something that Canadians want to see. But Canadians do want to know that we are doing our job and defending our institutions and continuing to allow our Parliament to function in the midst of a crisis, so that we're asking the right questions and getting the right answers. I'm very confident that today we will be able to agree on an approach that will ensure the continuity of our parliamentary institutions in this difficult time, but also be able to do that in a responsible way.
Thank you. Merci. Prochaine question, Louis-Samuel Perron, La Presse. À vous.
Oui. Oui, bonjour.
Yes, good morning, Mr. Trudeau. Will your government be introducing legislation to tighten up gun control, given what has just happened in Nova Scotia? Well, obviously, there are many questions now, and there is an investigation to be conducted as to what exactly happened in Nova Scotia. I don't want to draw any conclusions yet, but I would like to say that we made very clear commitments in terms of tightening up gun control. And we were at the point where we would have introduced legislation to ban assault weapons in this country. And we will bring forward those measures again as soon as we have an opportunity to do so, once we have come through COVID-19. Follow up? Yes, in Quebec this morning, construction workers have gone back to their construction sites. Now, is your government in support of this measure being taken in Quebec and across the country potentially? Well, I think that the various jurisdictions are making their own decisions within their field of jurisdiction, and I think it's up to each region and province to determine what can be done at what time. We are trying to coordinate these actions right across the country, but of course, the decisions will be different from one place to the other. And of course, it is absolutely critical that whatever decisions are made, the health and safety of workers and all Canadians to avoid the further spread of COVID-19 must be the top priority if we're talking about any type of work starting up again.
You've promised a ban on assault-style weapons. Given what we know about the shooting in Nova Scotia, could that have prevented these crimes? And if not, would you consider even tighter gun control measures?
As we know, this is very much an ongoing investigation that's in its early stages in Nova Scotia right now, so I don't want to jump to conclusions or make characterizations about what happened until we get a full accounting from the authorities. But in regards to gun control, we took very serious commitments in the election campaign and have moved forward and are moving forward on them to ensure that we're strengthening gun control in this country. I can say that we were on the verge of introducing legislation to ban assault-style weapons across this country. It was interrupted when the pandemic caused Parliament to be suspended. But we have every intention of moving forward on that measure and potentially other measures when the Parliament returns.
Would you approve of relaxing some physical distancing measures to allow the people in Nova Scotia to bury their loved ones properly?
I think that's a reflection that communities, that the province, and that all of us are going to have. We understand how incredibly painful it is for families who've lost loved ones in Nova Scotia this past day, to imagine that they're not going to be able to see them off together as a community. But at the same time, there are thousands and thousands of Canadians across this country who've lost loved ones to COVID-19 over the past days, and others who've lost family members to cancer and to other causes, who haven't been able to gather, to mourn, to grieve, to attend funerals. This is something that we are dealing with right now that is heartbreak on top of other heartbreaks. And I know that everyone will be looking for ways to demonstrate their solidarity without putting further at risk communities, first responders, our health professionals, and our seniors. Okay.
I recognize that there are people who have lost loved ones in this past day or so in Nova Scotia, and there are also people who have lost family members and friends or parents in the recent weeks because of COVID-19, and they have been unable to come together for funerals or to mourn together. This is a difficult situation made even worse in times of loss and mourning. But we must continue to try to be there for each other in these tragic times and ensure that we are not creating greater risk for our loved ones, our neighbors, our first responders, or our healthcare workers. We need to do everything we can to keep people safe and healthy, even in the midst of this tragedy and pandemic.
Prime Minister, was the Nova Scotia shooter on the federal government's radar? Were any federal agencies watching him?
There are many questions that people are asking about what happened and how it happened, and that investigation is ongoing, and I can assure everyone that the RCMP will be sharing details as they can, as they choose in the coming days, and there will be many opportunities to talk more about these things once we have a clearer idea of the facts.
What did you think when you learned about the degree of planning and impersonation in this terrible crime? Does it concern you that someone could create such a good fake?
I think as we learn more about this, we'll have to ask ourselves many questions about how it happened and if and what we can do to keep communities safer in the future. But my first thoughts when I heard of this tragedy yesterday and saw the numbers climb in terms of victims. My first thought was for Nova Scotians who, for the most part, know each other so much. They are such a connected group that I know that the vast majority of Nova Scotians will have a direct link with one or more of the many victims. And the entire province and the entire country is grieving right now as we come to grips with something that is absolutely unimaginable.
Kevin Gallagher, CTV National News. Prime Minister, as we're talking about the national tragedy in Nova Scotia and Canadians living under strict public health guidelines across the country, how appropriate is it for this ongoing battle over procedural matters to bring back Parliament? Why can't your government reach a deal on this?
I'm very hopeful that over the course of the day, Canadians will see parliamentarians coming together to demonstrate that our democracy is strong, that our institutions need to function, including during difficult times, indeed because of the difficult time we're going through, but that we can do so in a responsible way. As I've said, there is agreement amongst most of the parties in the House of Commons, and I hope to see by the end of this day that we're all in a place where we can both have our parliamentary institutions functioning, but doing so in a responsible way, given the context we're in. J'espère qu'on va se retrouver
I
à la
do
fin de la
hope
journée
that between now and the end of the day, we will have found a way of ensuring that our Parliament is functioning, that our democracy is healthy, not in spite of the pandemic, but because of the pandemic. But we will have to see. We do have the agreement of a number of parliamentarians, and we hope we will be able to find the right solution in order to continue to sit as a parliament responsibly, given the current circumstances.
What responsibility does your government take for not having this deal in place?
I think it's all of our collective responsibility to do the best we can through this difficult situation. It is really important for me that we continue to uphold our democracy, our democratic principles, the principles of accountability, the ability to move forward with new legislation to help Canadians. That really matters. But it really matters that we do so responsibly. I'm pleased that we have agreement amongst most parties, and I'm hopeful that by the end of the day today we'll have a clear path forward that will both defend our institutions and appreciate the context that we're in right now.
Bonjour, Monsieur Trudeau. Philippe Vincent Foisy, Radio-Canada.
Radio-Canada, good morning, Mr. Trudeau. I understand that there are questions that will be asked for many weeks to come about what happened in Nova Scotia, but my question is more about Canada in general. How is it that in 2020 we are still seeing mass shootings like this? Well, this is a tragic situation that reminds us that, unfortunately, there is still gun violence in this country. We have taken steps to try and strengthen gun control in Canada, but we must do more, and we have pledged to do more, and we will do more. We need to ensure that Canadians can live in safety in their communities, in their streets, and that's what we will continue to work on together. Now, will you be participating in that ceremony, and could you introduce your gun control bill in the coming weeks? Parliament will be sitting, so you could introduce it as early as this week. Yes, I intend to participate in the virtual vigil as much as possible, and we will most certainly be listening very carefully to what Canadians are saying with respect to more gun control. So we will look at what the options are when it comes to introducing that bill when the appropriate time is with us.
I have every intention of participating in the vigils virtually that I know many Canadians will be wanting to express their solidarity with the families in Nova Scotia who are grieving. And I am very much open to moving forward with our gun control legislation. I think there is always going to be questions about when is the right moment to do that. We are in the middle of a different crisis right now, but with Parliament returning in some fashion over the coming weeks, I think we will look at opportunities to do just that.
Merci beaucoup. C'est ce qui m'a fait à la conférence de presse aujourd'hui.
Merci tout le monde.